Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History, U.S. History Edition. Today, we're going to focus a lot on, in this newly budding industrial age, at the end of the 19th century and heading into the 20th century, so that's the late 1800s into the early 1900s, we've got this massive wave of inventions that are drastically going to change business and also everyday people's lives. And so where we're going to be heading as far as our learning target goes is we're going to be able to identify and explain how these revolutionary new inventions changed business but also changed life. And we're going to primarily focus on the 1800s, but we will be getting to some things that certainly affect the 20th century, especially towards the end of things with Henry Ford. So let's start with communications. So we've seen improvements. We've talked about the telegraph. We've talked about how Lincoln used it in the Civil War as an advantage. We've talked about also how it's important for communicating things from the West to the both coasts. And you're going to see improvements on on communication. Education will come later. But you'll see that in many ways it serves as a unifying force for the United States because it does connect us in a much quicker way. You're also going to see that it plays an important role in connecting us later on to Europe. It's also going to promote economic growth because decisions can be made much more quickly, and it's going to help production in the idea that you're going to be able to get what you need faster because you're going to be able to communicate your needs more quickly. And so with the telegraph, you're going to see you're still going to have messages transmitted in Morse code, your dashes and your dots, but you're going to see Cyrus Field is going to try to connect the United States a little bit more to Europe because Europe is still a massive player economically at this point, and the United States wants to remain connected to that. And so he transmits, he lays down this telegraph across the Atlantic Ocean, becomes known as the transatlantic, across or through, and then of course referring to the Atlantic, in 1866. And he's going to be able to send a telegram to Europe so much more quickly than ships could, so much more quickly than any form of communication we've had up to this point. What might have taken days by ship to get messages now is going to be seconds. It's going to be a few seconds to get a message over across the Atlantic Ocean. And so this is a great example of how the world in communication is going to change in this time period. You're also going to see telephones are going to first start to make it onto the scene. And telephones are going to be able to transmit speech. So not just this written language and not just written messages using Morse code, but Alexander Graham Bell is going to take and develop the first ability to record or to send audio, to send, again, the speech through his invention of the telephone. And so he forms the Bell Telephone Company in 1877, and the Bell Telephone Company had been around for a very long time. But the Library of Congress recorded, and you can still see this, and still actually can go and hear it if you ever make your way to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. But the first coherent, complete sentence was the famous, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want you," referring to, again, into a different room. And so it becomes just this brand new way of communicating. Quick check-in question here, discussion question. Once Cyrus Field lays the telegraph cable across the Atlantic Ocean, how long did it take for a telegram to transmit from Europe to the United States? So we've got a few days, a few hours, a few minutes, a few seconds. Think about it. Pause here if you need to. But the best answer is a few seconds. It's so much quicker. And now this is going to be very important moving forward. And this communication between the United States and Europe is going to prove to be very important in upcoming events, especially in events including World War I in the future. You also certainly have some inventions, roughly between the end of the beginning of the Civil War in 1860 to about 1890, that really were designed in order to help businesses, but also everyday life. And so you've got things like the typewriter, which is going to make and revolutionize book writing and newspapers, and you're just going to see an explosion in the availability of written material. George Eastman is also going to create the small box camera. Photographs are going to become so much more available, so much less expensive, and people will be able to do it themselves. You've also certainly got John Thurman's vacuum cleaner. Certainly vacuum cleaners have changed a lot from what we see today, but again, it's going to revolutionize the way people clean their homes. You also have Thomas Edison, who very much is often referred to as a wizard during this time period, and he's responsible for giving us the phonograph, which is going to effectively give music to the masses and make it more available. Certainly motion picture projector, which again is going to open up the door for films in the future. Certainly the storage, battery, being able to hold on to energy. And then he's going to improve the light bulb in a way that's going to just make it much more efficient and available. So you've got your phonograph here and available to the masses. You've got certainly your batteries here. And then you've got, again, the improved electric light bulb. George Westinghouse, he kind of branches out beyond the railroads and gets into electric transformers. These are going to become vital once electricity replaces oil, especially like kerosene. We, of course, need to mention, too, there are several African-American inventors who also contributed to this era, and we need to make sure that we include their accomplishments as well. Lewis Howard Latimer improved the wire for the light bulb and played a very important role in the future success that Edison had. And without that improved wire, you wouldn't have seen the success of the light bulb that it had. Granville Woods, his electromagnetic brakes are going to prove to be very important. You'll see those used in a variety of different ways. He also created the automatic circuit breaker, and any of you who are using electricity, you can thank Mr. Woods for saving you from quite a few dangers when it comes to safety with electricity. And that's going to, again, prove to be very important for overall safety of people. Then you have Elijah McCoy's. He created a mechanism for oil machinery. And so all of these are going to contribute to the future success of the United States, a little bit more of that urbanization, those growth of cities, and certainly overall production in the United States. You also have Jan E. Metzelinger, and I apologize if I mispronounce the last name. That's the way I've heard it. She also created the shoe making machine, which is going to prove to be another component of kind of this growing mass production that we're going to see in this time period. All right, which inventor that we mentioned here was known as the Wizard of Menlo Park? Was it Alexander Graham Bell, Thomas Edison, George Eastman, or Granville Woods? Again, pause if you need to, but the correct answer is Thomas Edison, again known as the Wizard of Menlo Park. As we get closer to the 20th century, you're going to see the emergence of kind of one of the last titans of industry. And for those of you who are fans of the Men Who Built America series from history, Henry Ford will be, again, one of the people mentioned in that series. He is going to revolutionize the way we move with the automobile and the way we make things with the moving assembly line. And he's really going to change industry, how we make things, but he's also going to change society because he's really going to open up the door for people to be able to move on their own using the automobile. All right, so Henry Ford is going to introduce us to one of the first automobiles in the United States. And he's not the first one. We'd have to mention Benz in Germany, give him due credit. And certainly later on, you'll see people like Diesel and others add to and perfect the combustible engine. But In the United States, Henry Ford introduces us to the Model T, which was an affordable automobile. And he introduces it to the public in 1908. So this is us fast forwarding a little bit to the 20th century. His belief was that he wanted people to be able to afford this. And we'll talk about how he does this. But one of the things that Henry Ford believed is that he wanted the people who made the cars to be able to afford to buy the cars. And there's a really great quote by Henry Ford out there that says, "Whether you think you can or you can't, you're right." And it's just always been a really interesting way of thinking, that your mindset so much determines your ability to do things. So I've always really liked that quote. But how did he do it? He uses the assembly line and he kind of refines it into what we'd call the moving assembly line. And so this is really pioneered by Ford, and it's used a way to manufacture cars that essentially each component is essentially built by a different person along the assembly line. And so somebody might be putting in the driving column and somebody else might be putting on the tires. And so, and obviously that's not the right order, but just to give you a couple of examples, it makes it so that each of those people get very good at what they do and they become more efficient and it becomes faster. And so it's the system of these machines and workers arranged that each person, again, performs that assigned task, and they essentially pass it down to the next person. But this assembly line revolutionizes multiple industries by enabling essentially manufacturers to create large quantities of goods more quickly. People who work on assembly lines get very good at what they're doing. They get faster, they get more efficient, they get better at it. And when you can do this more quickly, it actually makes it less expensive. And so we see this mass production of goods, including automobiles. And that's the production of large quantities of goods, typically using machinery and often an assembly line. This is still something that gets utilized even today. And certainly you got a great example and a good picture of a moving assembly line. And the first ones for Henry Ford were built in Detroit, Michigan. The other thing that's changing is that merchants start looking for new ways to get their products to people. And one of the ways that they do this is with mail order and then chain stores to help sell their goods. So some of the best examples of this are like the Montgomery Ward and Company, and then later the Sears and Roebuck Company. They create these catalogs, people decide what they want, they order them, and it gets shipped to them, via rail or other means. And so it just so much utilizes this availability of technology to get people to where they are. And so people can live anywhere and still get what they need. And of course, the internet has taken this to a whole new level in the 21st century. All right, quick discussion question here. Where was Henry Ford's first automobile plant? Was it in New York, Chicago, Philadelphia, or Detroit? Pause if you need to. But the correct answer here, as we mentioned, is in Detroit. It still remains a very important manufacturing center here in the United States. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to wrap up this video. Again, discussing inventions in the 1800s and the 1900s. For my students, hopefully you've been following along with the guide notes. Please ask any questions that you have. Those of you who are just listening, I appreciate it. And I hope that we're helping you to kind of understand this explosion of inventions kind of at around the turn of the century here. All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and have a great day.